The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea Lewis. I'm Juvenile Law Center's Communications Associate. First, I want to thank you for joining today's webinar entitled Ensuring Educational Success for Dependent Youth in Congregate Care. Real quick, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if you can all give me a signal via the chat box, just let me know if you're having any trouble. Okay, looks like most of you can hear me. Looks like we're good on the audio. Great, thanks guys. This webinar is being co-hosted by the Juvenile Law Center and the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education. And before we get started, I just want to run through some technical issues. If you're participating by phone today, your line will be muted during the entire webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can type those into the questions box that appear in the control panel, which most of you just did to let me know that you could hear me, so thank you. There is a little orange arrow at the top of the rectangle, which you can click to expand and collapse the control panel. We'll try to save some time at the end of today's webinar to answer your questions. Please note that all webinar materials, including the PowerPoint and publications we'll be referencing, will be sent to you in a follow-up email within a few days. We're also recording this webinar, and we'll include a link to the recording in that email. These materials will also be posted on our website at www.jlc.org. And right now I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator, Kate Burdick, who is staff attorney at the Juvenile Law Center.
Thanks, Chelsea. And thank you all so much for joining us today in this especially busy time before the holidays. Hold on, I'm just going to share my screen with you. My name is Kate Burdick. As Chelsea said, I'm an attorney with Juvenile Law Center. And Juvenile Law Center partners with the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law and the Education Law Center of Pennsylvania to form the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education. The Legal Center is hosting this webinar on improving education outcomes for youth in congregate care settings, thanks to the support of the Annie E. Casey Foundation and Casey Family Programs. And I want to highlight that the Legal Center's website, which is fostercareandeducation.org, includes a comprehensive database you can search to find materials to use in your jurisdiction. Let me just show that website to you all real fast. So this is the website, fostercareandeducation.org, and at the top here you can see our database. You can click on that and search by state, topic, format, audience, or keyword. And we also have a national listserv that all of you are invited to join. Let me go back to the PowerPoint here. And if you would like to join that listserv, if you're not already on it, you can just email the link that I put there. And this webinar, in fact, came about because we heard from many stakeholders on our listserv that they wanted more information about best practices around education for youth in congregate care. So we hope that this presentation today begins to answer that request. And after I give a brief introduction, you're going to hear from Liann Seiter, who's a technical assistant and data specialist with the National Evaluation and Technical Assistance Center for the Education of Children and Youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk. That's NDTAC for short. And she'll be giving us an overview of one federal funding source available to support education programs for neglected youth. Then we're going to hear about a model collaboration between a school district and local group homes in California. James Wogan, who's an administrator with Foster Youth Services in Mount Diablo School District in California, will be explaining the fabulous work he and his team have been doing there. As Chelsea mentioned, we hope to have time at the end for a few questions. So please type your questions into the comment box as we go, and at the webinar we'll ask our speakers as many as time allows. You'll also have our contact information at the end of the webinar if you would like to email us directly after the fact. Okay. So
Hello, can you guys all hear me? Okay. I'll assume that that's a yes. Thank you, Kate, for that introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I was on mute for a second there. Can we go back to my sharing my screen before Liann talks?
Yep.
Sorry about that technical difficulty. Here are your speakers today. And before we get to Liann, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. And I'm going to be referencing these reports that I've pulled up here. Before we get started about talking about education for youth who are in congregate care settings, I just want to note that nationally there has been a move to decrease the use of institutional settings, which we refer to as congregate care, as placement settings for kids in the child welfare system, and instead to keep children in the least restrictive, most family-like setting possible. This 2009 report from Annie E. Casey that I've linked to here gives good background on this movement. And getting kids out of the congregate care setting may, in many cases, be the best way to improve their education. But on the whole, the children and youth who remain in congregate care are not having their educational needs met. Earlier this year, Part 2 of the Invisible Achievement Gap was released. This is groundbreaking research out of California that links statewide education and child welfare data at the individual level for all California children in care. They found that kids in group homes were among those doing the worst. Achievement gaps in English language arts and mathematics were particularly apparent for students placed in group homes compared to other students in foster care. And students in group homes were among the least likely to graduate. They were also more likely to have attended more schools than their peers who were in kinship homes. The National Disability Rights Network also conducted a national survey of protection and advocacy agencies in the country to examine the education of youth with intellectual disabilities who are in the child welfare system in various residential settings. And Education Law Center in Pennsylvania also looked at the education of youth in congregate care a few years ago. Those are the two studies linked to at the bottom there, and some troubling and common themes emerge from those two studies. So first, many students are forced to attend school on-site at the facility simply because that's where they've been placed for living purposes, even if the school doesn't meet their needs and isn't the least restrictive environment for them. There's a real challenge when children are expected to be in congregate care settings for only a short time. Their services may be delayed or denied entirely, so there's a challenge around the temporary nature of the congregate care placement. Inferior education, not meeting their needs. When education is provided, it's unfortunately often sub-quality with staff who may not hold proper certifications, and it may not even provide academic credit. And there may be inadequate special education. Schools are typically not providing all the special education services required by the student's individualized education program, or IEP. Students eligible for special education, school is often denied as a punishment, which is very troubling and illegal that some students are being taken out of the classroom entirely as a punishment for disability-related behaviors. And students eligible for special education need a quote-unquote parent as defined by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to make education decisions for them and ensure they stay on track. If they don't have a parent, the school district or court must appoint a surrogate, but this rarely happens on time or at all. And I'll note that caseworkers are not permitted to serve that role, and this is a particular problem for students with disabilities who have no foster parents and often have no other consistent adult in their life to serve this role. Inadequate transition services. Students in congregate care are typically ill-prepared to transition to adulthood. They are not receiving adequate transition services through their IEPs or through the child welfare discharge planning process. This makes it more likely for them to fail after aging out of care and out of the special education system, including making it more likely that they'll become incarcerated or homeless. School records are often not timely transferred or are lost entirely, which makes it less likely that students will be in the correct courses and receiving appropriate services. And finally, it also makes it less likely if their records are lost that they'll receive credit for their work, something already complicated by the fact that they may not be in the courses that can confer relevant academic credit for the time when they're in facility. So that's some background on what some of the problems are. but unfortunately, there are some things we know that work well. You'll hear more about this from our next two speakers, but I wanted to summarize a few points to start us off about what does work to help students in congregate care succeed in the short and long term. And you can find more information about these in the question and answer document that the Legal Center put out earlier this year on meeting the educational needs of students in congregate care. I will just show that document quickly. This is what it looks like here. Oops. And here we are. Sorry about this. Here we go. So school stability. It's often forgotten that students in congregate care are eligible for school stability under federal law. So if it's in their best interest to remain in the same school, even though they've changed living placements and they are now in a congregate care setting, the Child Welfare Agency must still work with the local education agency to ensure school stability. Unfortunately, these facilities are often far away from the child's home or previous placement, so length of commute may come in as a factor when making that best interest determination, but this should still be an option to consider. And attending the local community school, if school stability is not in the child's best interest, public school in the community will often be the most appropriate school for the child, rather than automatically attending school on grounds at the facility. I recently spoke with Stuart McCullough, who's the executive director of some of the group homes in the district where James Wogan, who's our third speaker today, works. And Stuart sends all his kids to the local district and noted that it does these kids a real disservice to keep them sheltered in an on-site school. Instead, they need to be prepared to function in the real adult world. So that's why Stuart makes sure that his students can access school in the community where James works. Public school in the community is also often the least restrictive option for students with disabilities and is more likely to have a full array of services and opportunities and is more likely to offer academic credit that other districts will honor. There are several states that explicitly give students the right to attend school in the community, even if they're in a congregate care setting. As I mentioned before, children in congregate care are more likely to lack a parent or other adult who is authorized to make education decisions for them, and having adults involved in the child's education is critical to making sure they don't fall through the cracks. Jurisdictions, including California and Pennsylvania, allow juvenile courts to appoint educational decision makers or representatives to make general or special education decisions when needed. In all states, school districts must ensure that students eligible for special education have a quote-unquote parent, and if not, must appoint a surrogate parent in 30 days. Illinois actually has a statewide surrogate parent program exclusively focused on providing surrogate parents for youth in residential care. And now finally, the coordinated transition plan. Fostering connections requires a detailed transition plan be created at least 90 days before a youth ages out of care. And caseworkers should ensure planning starts early and that this plan includes graduation and post-secondary goals and concrete steps for how the youth will attain these goals. For youth with disabilities, this plan should be coordinated with the transition plan in the IEP, which begins at age 16 or earlier in some states. Finally, to make sure the youth transitions smoothly to the next school when leaving congregate care, caseworkers should ensure that the child re-enrolls promptly in the next school and that the youth receives credit for work done while in congregate care by gathering transcripts, checking their accuracy, and working with the youth's previous and current school districts. Some jurisdictions have policies to support this. For example, in Maine, there are special protections for certain highly mobile students that involve creating a schoolwork recognition plan to outline how the student will complete schoolwork and graduate on time. So now I'm going to turn this over to Liann Seiter of NDTAC, who's going to tell us more about how that program works and why it's relevant for this population.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kate, for setting the stage. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you can all see my first title slide. So we're going to talk through, I'm going to first start by telling you a little bit about the organization in which I come from. And then I want to give you an overview of Title I Part D, which are funds that are available through the federal government that can serve youth who are in neglect facilities. So when I give the overview, we're going to kind of talk about the goals of the Part D programs, how the funding works, who you would contact if you're an eligible facility, and how the Part D funds can be used. So we're going to then go into neglect programs specifically and talk about who is eligible and what states are using Title I Part D to support neglect facilities. We're going to give some examples of Part D neglect programming that has been, how the funds have been used for neglect programs. We're going to talk a little bit about how we've encouraged states to evaluate their neglect facilities and how Title I Part D is evaluated at the federal level. And then finally, I'm going to highlight a few resources that we have at NDTAC that I think would be helpful to you as you work through mainly the transition of use from these facilities. So we'll go through that. So kind of an aggressive agenda, but we'll hopefully get through. So first, about NDTAC. We are a technical assistance center that is housed in American Institutes for Research. We operate under a contract with the Department of Education, and John McLaughlin is our federal program manager. Mainly, our mission is to provide technical assistance to Part D state coordinators. So we provide technical assistance mostly at the state level, but we also act as facilitators to connect different organizations, agencies, interest groups. We really do work a lot at collaboration and coordination. Our focus in the past has mostly been on the delinquent population, mostly because it's the largest population that's benefiting from Part D funds. But in the last few years, we've been making efforts to focus in on the neglect side of Title I Part D. And in these efforts, we've released an overview of neglect programs. We've also, in this year, during our annual conference, one of the 2 plenary sessions focused in on neglect programs. And we had Kathleen McNaught come and speak as a guest speaker, which was really helpful. We've also added Kathleen McNaught as part of our expert panel to help us kind of think through issues related to the education of neglected youth. So first off, what is Title I Part D? It was most recently reauthorized under the ESCA in 2001, and it supplements the education of youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk. Our goals are, since neglected and delinquent youth often get behind educationally or academically, Title I Part D is intended to supplement their education so that they can meet these challenging academic standards. Part D also provides students with transition services that help them become successful members of their community after they leave an institution. It also, the third goal of Title I Part D is to prevent at-risk youth from dropping out, and particularly youth who have been system involved. So I want to show this diagram of kind of how Title I Part D works. This diagram is, shows the relationships between the different entities, and this one particularly shows how the application for funds works as it works its way up through the different entities. And after applications are submitted up, then the funding then trickles down through those same filters. So I'm going to talk about funding. So we start at the U.S. Department of Education. They provide funds to the state education agencies, and they allocate it based on the count of neglected or delinquent youth that is collected through the annual count. The SEA, or the State Education Agency, then, if you look over to the left side, they give what's called Subpart 1. So there's a Subpart 1 and Subpart 2. Subpart 1 funds are used to fund state agency programs. And so the funds then filter on down, usually through formula funding based on the count of students. And then on the right side, you'll see that the state education agency will fund locally operated programs through the LEAs or through the local education agencies. So that's how the funding works. And the reason I wanted to show you that is that in order to receive Title I Part D funds, you go through your state education agency. And I'm going to pull over our website so you can see. So this is our website, and if you click on state information, it takes you to a map. And I'm going to click on Arizona simply because I originally grew up in Arizona, so I'm a little partial. I'm also the TA liaison for that state. And you can see here the ND coordinator's contact information is listed here, so their phone number and email address. So if you are an eligible facility and you want to be included in the count, that is who you would contact. So going next, how can Title I Part D funds be used? So Title I Part D, So subpart 1, or the funds that are provided to the state agency programs, it can be used to supplement the educational services provided to youth in those state education or state agency programs. It also can be used to purchase or lease equipment that is used to help these youth academically succeed, and it can help cover costs of the facility or state's costs associated with evaluation that is required by the law. Subpart 2 funds can be used very similarly to Subpart 1 funds. It can also be used to prepare students for high school, employment, or post-secondary. It can provide transition services to help these youth transition on to education or further education or employment. And it can also be used, Subpart 2 has an at-risk part of it. That's where the at-risk comes in. And it provides funds for at-risk programming that goes through the LEA to prevent dropouts. So, so now we're going to get down to neglect programs, or the neglect side of Title I Part D. So the important thing, so this is a definition that comes from the Title I Part D statute, and I think it's important to note that Title I Part D can only serve neglect programs that are not foster homes. So it's a public or private residential facility other than a foster home. And the youth that are placed in these programs are there due to abandonment, neglect, or death of a parent or guardian. So I know some of you work within the foster care system, and Title I Part D is meant to serve the same types of youth, but just in maybe slightly different facilities. This is kind of a summary. I'm going to show you a map of which states are using the funds, but I wanted to make sure to give kind of a summary of what's going on. So 8 states use Subpart 1 funding to support state agency-run neglect programs. 17 states use Subpart 2 funds to support locally run neglect programs, and 6 states use both Subpart 1 and Subpart 2 to fund the education of youth within neglect programs. Of the 21 states that don't use Title I Part D to supplement the education of youth in neglect programs, they may be using Part A neglect set-aside. So Part D, so in these states that are not using Part D, they may be using their Title I Part D funds to serve their delinquent youth, and Title I Part A funds to serve their neglected youth, or the neglect set-aside. So don't worry, not all of these states they are helping serve their youth, just not through Title I Part D. It's just one option they have available to them. So this is a map. As you can see, the peach states are utilizing only Subpart 1 funds. The blue states are using Subpart 2. And the orange states are those that are using both Subpart 1 and Subpart 2. If you have questions about whether your state is using these funds to serve neglected youth, you can contact your NRD coordinator, which is what I showed earlier. So in preparation, we designed a neglect overview, or an overview of the neglect programs in the Title I Part D programming. And as we prepared to write that brief, we called the state coordinators to talk with them about how they're using their Part D funds for their within their neglect programs. And we asked them basically, what are your programs doing with Part D funds? What are your neglect programs doing with these Part D funds? And so these were the answers that we got. So I'm going to go through them one by one, and this kind of gives you an idea of what Part D does within these neglect programs, or for the education of these youth. So one of the first thing is summer school programming. Many of the states are using the funds to expand their school year so that the youth, while they're in the facilities, can still have these educational activities to kind of get them up to speed. They also provide career and vocational training programs. They use the funds to pay for tutors. And sometimes this is offered at the local education agency, like at the district, or sometimes the district will provide tutors that come to the facility after school to help the youth at the facility. If there are youth who are academically behind, which most likely there are, they use the funds to provide supplemental reading and mathematics instruction. And in one particular state, they're using Part D to support to pay for an additional literacy teacher and some technology to really do these, to help the youth get up to speed on their reading and math. They also have academic technology programs. As we know, technology is super important for transitioning successfully and for successful education. So the other thing they Some other things they do is provide educational behavioral support counseling. They'll pay for transition coordinators or transition activities to help those youth as they transition from school to school or from facility to school, and getting those records transferred in a timely manner and that sort of thing. They also provide, use the funds to pay for or lease additional materials or equipment that's needed. So that is how Part D funds have been used in neglect programs. In our most recent conference, as I said, we covered logic models, and one of the two plenary sessions we focused in on logic model development for neglect programs. And every state is in charge of monitoring their own subgrantees, and they're allowed to do it how they will. And so at NDTAC, we try to help them think through what they should be looking for and how they should be evaluating these programs. And so the act of making the logic model was to help them set these 5 long-term goals for their neglect programs, and then think through kind of the actions that are needed at the facilities in order to reach these long-term goals, and then the activities that were needed at the state education agency to then support those facilities in making this long-term goal, and then the resources that were needed. And so we developed a logic model guide, which there is a link to on the last slide, and I'll show you that. But our logic model guide goals were based on the 5 of the 8 goals that were outlined in the Blueprint for Change document that was released by the American Bar Association. And yeah. And so I'm going to list out these 5 goals. If you want to know more about kind of distilling down what was needed at the facility level or at the SEA level, questions that we asked to get them thinking about that, you can go to this logic model guide. So the first goal was that youth are guaranteed seamless transitions between schools and school districts when moves do occur. The second goal is that youth have the opportunity to support to fully participate in all aspects of their school experience. That youth have support to prevent school dropout and truancy and disciplinary actions. And the fourth is that youth are involved and engaged in all aspects of their education and educational planning, and they can be advocates for their educational needs. And then the fifth and final one was that youth have an adult who are invested in their education during and after their time in and out of home care. And we felt like these goals, we kind of picked out of the 8 goals in that blueprint what Part D could impact or Part D could affect. And another way that we measure success of Title I Part D at the federal level is to look at our GEPRA measures. And so this is for all programs, Title I Part D programs, not just the neglected programs, but we look at the proportion of youth of long-term students who, and long-term means that they've been in the facility 90 days or longer, so at least 3 months. So it's the proportion of youth who are improving from pre to post test in reading and math. And then the other 2 are just based on all students, not just long-term students. And it's the proportion of students who earned high school course credits and the portion of students who obtained a high school diploma or GED. And so this is kind of what we're looking for, the academic outcomes that Ed has determined as being important for success. So now I'm going to talk about resources and kind of get to what resources are available to you through us. So the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform put out a white paper several years ago on addressing the unmet educational needs of children and youth in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems. And if you haven't seen this, it's actually really great. It highlights 6 principles that address the educational needs of youth in juvenile justice and child welfare. And unfortunately, you can't see, but we're going to be talking about, NDTAC has partnered with CJJR to develop guides or develop a series of practice guides that kind of follow these principles and to kind of enumerate how to make that principle happen, how to make it work. And so I wanted to highlight 2 of the guides that I think would be helpful to you. And the first one is the individually tailored support services for youth and interagency communication and collaboration. So, oh, there it is. So those are the 2 that we're going to focus in on. So This first one is the Individual Academic and Behavioral Approaches Strategy Guide. Within this guide, there are 5 practices, and under each practice, there are 3 to 4 strategies of how to achieve that practice. And so they're listed here. And so this is really about tailoring your, getting your educators to tailor what they're doing to the students and get them really engaged and help them increase their educational needs. This is really helpful. The next one is Interagency Collaboration, our Interagency Collaboration Guide. I won't go into detail about this one here, but it provides information about how to collaborate with other stakeholders that are involved with these youth. As we know, many of them are transitioning either in and out of the child welfare system, but also they potentially are crossover youth and in and out of the juvenile justice system. And so because there's multiple agencies involved, it's really important to see that collaboration across them. And we've seen this at the federal level. There's been a real big push for collaboration, and we're trying to help that happen at the state and at the local level, because we know that it's through that collaboration and through that communication that these youth, the needs of these youth are really addressed with more synergy. And then finally, I just wanted to show our NDTAC resources. So the first one is the guide that I referred to earlier about logic model development, and the link to it is there. And then the second one is our NDTAC program overview, kind of talking about the students within the neglect programs. Also highlights how the funding has been used, which I summarized earlier. We also have a really great brief on improving conditions for learning of youth who are neglected or delinquent. And then the next one is state resource pages, and this is a link to where you would find your NRD coordinator. And the final one is a transition toolkit, which while it relates, it really relates to juvenile justice system, I think there is some use for these principles across the systems, and especially as it relates to your crossover youth. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Kate, I think.
Thank you so much, Liann. We hear a lot about how funding is a barrier to education success for all kids who are in care, and especially those who are in congregate care. So it's really helpful to learn how we can tap into that Title I Part D funding to help support programs in congregate care facilities or to assist youth who are transitioning from those facilities. And if you wouldn't mind, Chelsea, sharing my screen for a second, I would like to show everyone a little more about the Blueprint for Change that Liann mentioned. I just want to point out that if you go to the Legal Center's website, under Materials, you have the whole Blueprint for Change here ready to go. So I just wanted to show that. And please, everyone, feel free to type your questions for Liann and for James into the comment box, and we will do our best to address as many of those questions as we can at the end. In the interest of time, I'm now going to invite our next speaker, James Wogan, to talk about the wonderful work he's doing to promote education success for the students in the group homes that are in his California school district. So, James, take it away.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Chelsea, Kate, and Liann. I've learned a lot already just in preparing for this webinar. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the strategies that we've been using here in Mount Diablo Unified. Let me just make sure you've got a full screen view. This is me, Administrator of School Link Services. I have too many initials after my name, including MFT, LCSW. But below are the programs that I run in Mount Diablo Unified, starting with Foster Youth Services, and we are going to highlight our interagency collaboration with group homes and other agencies supporting foster youth in our school district. A little bit about us. Mount Diablo Unified is 30 miles east of San Francisco. Our amazing superintendent is Dr. Nellie Meyer. We have 34,000 students, a very diverse student population, and 50 schools. We are a district in significant disproportionality, identified as SIGDIS, some of the acronyms that we use here. And we have a foster youth services school district program dedicated to the educational success of foster youth. So due to time, restraints, I'm not able to share all of the components of the program, but I did want to highlight a few that Kate was mentioning we wanted to share with others. So first, though, we have a broad array of stakeholders that are invested in the education of foster youth. And we meet together to shape the vision of the support and services that we will provide for foster youth. I won't review this whole list. You can see it later. But just to highlight down here, my arrow is working foster youth services advisory meeting. I'll show you a photo of our most recent foster youth advisory meeting. These are a group of our stakeholders meeting together to look at the start of the school year. Youth Voice is a strong part of our program. They've helped shape our services and support and let us know, often in a rather direct way, what's working and what's not. And so we outline our shared vision, and then, like teachers, are doing backwards planning to determine how we're going to get to our goals and how we'll measure our success. Part of our program includes interagency collaboration, so I want to kind of shine a light on two interagency collaboration mechanisms that exist. The first is a joint meeting between child welfare, mental health, group homes, and education, where we're all at the same table talking about kids with specific focus on our foster youth who are residing in group homes. Here in California, we're prone to using a wide range of acronyms, so I'm going to try to avoid them and speaking in just general language. But who's at the table or the right people on the bus is very important. At our interagency meeting is child welfare, child and family services, their placement supervisors, youth homes, the mental health clinician from each group home, children's mental health, and then us, Mount Diablo Unified School District, school social workers, as well as myself, an administrator. And then we have an educational liaison from the County Office of Education, an important role because the County Office of Ed straddles the school districts within our county, 17 school districts. And then a shared employee who is jointly employed by group home and school district. One of the strategies that Liann was mentioning as far as interagency collaboration, and this has been a very effective model for us, that to have an employee with badges to both agencies. So at our interagency collaboration meetings, we meet monthly at CFS. In fact, we just met yesterday. We meet monthly at child welfare, and we discuss foster youth who reside, as I said, in group homes, with particular attention paid to their health, mental health, and educational background information, some of which we have limited amounts of information, other times more background, especially if they've been in the child welfare system for a number of years. We develop plans across agencies to deliver coordinated services. So really this is where we're all at the table supporting youth. What we pay particular attention to is foster youth with special needs, especially mental health needs. We've seen an increase in the number of youth who are arriving with severe behavioral health and mental health needs that really require agencies working together to provide their support at schools, but also in the group homes and in the community. We, as Liann outlined, the ways you can use your Title I funds. In our program, we have joint funding. We use Title I neglected funds, Title I Part A. I won't go into the whole list, but part of what we do with our Title I funds is to employ a school psychologist who works directly for and only for foster youth. And she's able to expedite special education assessments when they're needed. What we see too often is foster youth who have moved from one home and one district to another, and without the continuity, as Kate was mentioning, that stability in educational placement. Often their special education assessments haven't been completed, or they were started and unfinished. And so we employ our own school psychologists to expedite those special education assessments and make sure kids with special needs get the help that they need. I just want to give a few examples, and then after this I'll talk about our group home interagency collaboration. We just met yesterday, actually, and discussed the youth who are residing in our group homes. One example is Joaquin, 16-year-old who arrived with severe mental health needs, and we had a request for a psychoeducational assessment and an initial IEP. As I mentioned, youth who move around to many places. Joaquin had moved to 6 different schools so far this school year, and it's only December. And at each school, there was either some discussion of psychoeducational assessment, or what we saw in his records was discipline entries, suspensions, and sometimes alternatives to suspension, but no mention of mental health needs, diagnosis, information. It's just not reflected in educational records. And this is the case for too many of our youth, I think, who have mental health needs, and yet they're not reflected in their educational background information or records. And so if an assessment was started, sometimes that's hard to track down. So we're often starting from the beginning, gathering information. What's helpful about the interagency collaboration is that with permission from the holder of educational rights, after we can track him or her down, or appoint a holder of ed rights, as Kate was saying, sometimes it's not come to everybody's attention that we need a court order to appoint someone to hold ed rights. Then we're able to move forward with a psychoeducational assessment and meet his needs. So another student who we discussed is actually a transgender youth who is arriving at a school, and we have been working with our schools to serve transgender youth and comply with legislation here in California, as well as be sensitive and compassionate in the way that we interact. We developed gender support plans for our transgender youth. It's a topic for a different presentation. But it is helpful for us to have all the agencies at the table. To confess, I have to say that child welfare and mental health were already meeting together, and we invited ourselves to the table to be part of the discussion, because so often they were talking about kids with special needs and enrollment, questions around credits and enrollment and standing and school placement, and so it just made sense that we be at the table. We've been there for 5 years from now, and even when we disagree, it's helpful to have a place for us to work out or kind of shared vision where we're going and what the plan is across agencies to support our youth. So I can't say enough about meeting together and having the right people on the bus. And then the second thing that I really want to shine a light on is a successful partnership that we have with our biggest group home provider, Youth Homes Incorporated, and we've been working together for more than 10 years and had a working relationship for many years, calling each other each day, either school calling the group home or the group home on the phone, or contacting us to work out plans to support kids. We did formalize our partnership with Youth Homes in a memorandum of understanding, and I shared that with Kate to post online. So that'll be available for you to use, and feel free to use it as a template. I'll just go over some of the key components of this partnership agreement with Youth Homes, and then give you some example of how working together, with a group home has benefited our kids, really been successful. So the MOU, or partnership agreement, was presented to our school board on September 25th, 2013. And it formalized a long-standing partnership between the school district and Youth Homes Incorporated, the group home provider. They have 4 group homes in our school district. It used to be 5. What we call in California level 10 and level 12 group homes, 2 level 10 and 2 level 12. Those are numbers are a reference to the training that the group home staff receive, as well as the youth to staff ratio. So the MOU formalized our partnership with Youth Homes, and it allowed group home staff members to provide support services at district schools. This is very key, especially for kids newly arriving in the school district who had relationships or quickly developing positive relationships with group home staff members, and were coming again to a new environment, a new school, and their support often so that staff members could stay with them if they needed to, or respond when our youth were escalated and we were unable to de-escalate them. The MOU also allowed my personnel, my staff members, to work in the group homes. I say my, but really it's our staff members. In particular, the school psychologists who I mentioned, doing expedited psychoeducational assessments. Sometimes that required that she go to the group home and meet individually with the foster youth, as well as with permission, his or her clinicians, mental health clinicians, care providers. So the MOU also had a side benefit as we looked at funding and expanding our program. It provided that formal evidence of interagency collaboration as we pursued funding either categorically or for grants. And then, of course, for the lawyers in the room or in the webinar room that mutually indemnify the school district and group home providers. And so both agencies were protected or indemnified as we were working together, often in very high-need situations. So if I may then just give you a few examples of this working together with a group home. I think it's one thing on paper, but working together with youth who are recent arrivals and sometimes who we don't know very well, but we're working quickly to get to know. The first is Kayla, who was temporarily placed in a group home by child welfare with a stated intention, both to the group home staff members and to her, that she was only there temporarily, that she would be moving to a residential treatment facility sometime in the near future. She just needed to have an IEP. And once she had an IEP, because she had not been assessed previously, she could be moved to a higher level of care. As Kate was mentioning with some of the barriers too often, I think the solution for foster youth who are manifesting behavior difficulties or who are struggling or with whom adults are struggling is to move them either out of a classroom, out of a school, or out of a group home facility into a more restrictive setting. But she is one example of many who the group home staff and my staff members, our school social workers, tutors, and mentors started to get to know Kayla and in many ways normalized her experience. And after a week in school, she was much calmer and started to meet some other students, be introduced to a group counseling. It's a foster youth empowerment group that we run. I'll say a little bit more about that later. And she is a high-need girl and very vocal, very strong in advocating for herself, but she's really not a residential treatment facility foster youth in the way she was seen previously. So she's an example of a foster youth who, when they received support at her home where she was living, and that support was coordinated with the people in the school where she was attending, she stabilized and was able then to remain in our school district, which is where she grew up when she was younger prior to entering the foster care system. And she's doing well with the support that's in place. So we obviated the need for residential treatment, higher level of care through direct support services. And we can talk about what that approach was and how we work with kids, both our philosophy as well as the types of services that we provide. We operate from a strength-based approach and connect kids not only with counseling services, but often youth activities and tutoring and mentoring caring adults in their life. So one other example, if I can move to the second highlighted area down below, is the proactive support versus reactive suspension. And this came about because a group home staff member at night, the night before, girls coming to school on a Monday morning let us know that there was a planned altercation, that it was probably going to take place on the school campus, that they had been trying to calm both girls down and dissuade them from fighting with each other, but it appeared like something was going to happen at school. And so they called us and the school, let us know what was happening. And this really comes about, I think, because we have strong relationships with our group home providers. So we received a phone call saying this is what was happening. We do have a relationship with both girls. We're able to meet with them individually and then bring them together for conflict mediation, and then follow up with the individual as well as the group counseling that I mentioned. I would just highlight here that sometimes the reason for referral for counseling is about behavior that's being manifest as opposed to the feelings that are behind the behavior. So for both girls, as the holidays approach, they have many big and difficult feelings, including abandonment and loss and frustration, not just with each other, but living in a group home with 6 other girls and sharing that space isn't an easy place to live, I'm sure, as many of you know. And so, we start by listening to our youth and what they're telling us. Had we only dealt with the behaviors, we might have referred them to anger management, for example, and not discussed the loss and the big feelings that turns out they had a lot in common. They were both feeling similar ways. The holidays are approaching, and I think they had an opportunity then to learn a lot about themselves and to grow and see some alternatives to violence. Even though they were still frustrated with each other, they could come to a mutual agreement. And that benefits not only school, because they don't get suspended, school isn't disrupted, but also at the group home, their level, the behavior level, many group homes use either a color or a number system related to privileges, so they're able to keep their privileges and be out for the weekend and take advantage of some of the field trips that were going on that weekend as a group home. So it's really about proactive communication rather than reacting after the fact. And so it's one example of group homes and education working together, getting to know each other. I want to turn then to something I mentioned, which is foster youth empowerment groups. We started running these 5 years ago. They're group counseling dedicated only to foster youth. It's open to foster youth who reside in group homes with relative caregivers or foster families. And it meets weekly at high schools and continuation schools. Really, we set this up because our youth told us that they need an opportunity to connect with each other, and it grew beyond, our intention early on was to convey information about independent living skills and life after high school and opportunities and resources. Our intended model initially was much more adult to child connections and support, and reaching many of our foster youth with similar information. But as it turns out, their connection with each other became one of the strongest pieces of our program. And we have multiple components of what we do district-wide for foster youth. But their support for each other over and over again is what the kids say is making such a big difference in their life and why they come to school and looking forward to connecting with each other, both in the group as well as outside of the group. Our groups are co-led by a school social worker and a social work intern. I mentioned our stakeholders before. We have partnerships with local universities, San Francisco State University, California State University, East Bay, and UC Berkeley School of Social Welfare. Our liaison there is Robert Ayas, and he's connected us with many MSW and school social work graduate students who are working together with our youth. So I'm off the topic of groups a little bit just to let you know that who's leading it includes an experienced and credentialed school social worker, as well as somebody who's gaining experience and training to work in this field. So they lead it together, and it creates a safe, confidential environment where foster youth share feelings. They talk about their stressors, their accomplishments, and they're connecting with other peers who understand the complexity of their lives. And, as I was saying, some witness this group, or to bear witness to them supporting each other, the kids supporting each other, and just how powerful that has been, really kind of requires some adjustment on our part and working with the school, with the principals and others to free up their schedules to participate in this group and make sure that they have the opportunity on a regular basis to connect with each other. So the youth-to-youth support connection, you know, we've seen it take place on the kind of larger school environment outside of the classroom, with one youth de-escalating another and saying, you know, that's okay. They don't, things like, do you know what oppression is? They don't define you. Remember your dreams. Remember what we said in the group. You can do this, you know, and it's very positive to see one foster youth supporting another, and almost the adults standing back saying, we let them do this. We'll meet with them in a little bit, but when they're supporting each other, it's really, really very powerful. The other thing that came out of the group when they gave us feedback about our program and the way we do business is that they said that prior to running the group, they felt invisible and depersonalized by acronyms. Very good feedback, I think, for school staff to hear that, you know, that not to say you're an NMD, which is a non-minor dependent, or how to, you know, use all of the IEP-related language. So the permanency of the relationships has been happening for some time. I know we're short on time, so just to look at, spotlight on a few things, kind of for district programs. As a school district, we've been offering some technical support to other school districts as they establish programs to support foster youth. So you'll see a few of our systems in place. We have a designated administrator at each school. We have school coordinated care teams to keep track of support plans. I did want to mention these trends that Kate and Liann and I were talking about, that we're seeing fewer foster youth overall enrolling in our school district, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. The youth who are in care have a much higher level of mental health needs, specifically trauma, PTSD, and danger to self and others has increased. If you look at for the past 5 years, I can kind of go over some of the data trends. What we did see is that our support services were working as far as behavior, that if you offer behavioral support, what you get is behavioral results. So increased attendance and decreased suspension, disciplinary incidents, but we weren't really moving the needle on the credits and the GPA. So it was the support services combined with one-on-one academic intervention that led to increased GPA, kids earning credits, and then feeling good because of their success in the classroom and graduation rates. So we put a big focus on attendance. Attendance rate overall for foster youth, this is K-12, is 95.5%. And then the graduation rate for us, these are for foster youth, not those who have moved in and out very quickly, but who've been in our school district for more than 2 years, is 92%. And it's stayed close to that for a number of years. We're almost out of time, so I can't really highlight our donation drive that we're doing for the holidays. It's very powerful. But I'd just like to end, maybe a picture says 1,000 words, and here we are at last year's graduation with foster youth, who many people said early on that he was not going to make it, and yet here he is graduating and has many of the people who supported him, including a relative who is standing next to us. So that's me on the right, and it's a pleasure sharing our programs with you today.
Thank you so much, James. And I, when we first spoke, really impressed by the comprehensive array of services that you provide, and the positive relationship that you have with the group home in your district. So I just commend you for that. I want to get really quickly to a couple of questions in the few final minutes we have here. Liann, a couple of people asked generally, can Part D funds be used for transportation from the institution to the school district of origin or local school district to support school stability?
Introduced her earlier. Can you hear me now? I have my colleague Lauren Amos also on the call, and she's actually our use of funds guru. So I am not exactly sure if the funds can be used for transportation, but that's something I can look into and find out. But Lauren, do you have thoughts about that? Lauren?
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Part D funds that have been awarded to LEAs, there is some precedence for them being used for transportation costs. It's not ideal. The thing that we typically remind folks at the center is that the funds are there to provide supplemental services, supplemental education services. If transportation is essential in order to provide those services, that's something that could be considered by the state Title I Part D coordinator, but again, it's not the priority for those funds.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And just while we're on Liann, to qualify for Part D funds, do institutions have to serve only youth who are neglected and not youth who are abused or otherwise dependent?
So the usually we utilize, for the annual count to be included in the count, they look at the charter of the organization, and you would then count, I believe you would go in and so what if the facility is eligible in that it does serve youth that are neglected under our definition, then they would count the youth that would be eligible under Title I Part D, so they may not include the other youth, although it's, I mean, I assume abandonment and neglect would include youth that have been abused. So I would think so. Anyway.
Thank you. James, two for you. First, are there other school districts in the county where you are working that participate in the collaboration with the group homes?
There are. We have a foster youth advisory meeting that meets quarterly, and our neighboring school districts send their liaison, their district liaison for foster youth to those meetings.
Great. Another question is, how did you first get the youth to come to the foster youth group homes and stay engaged?
To come, the kids were at the group homes to stay engaged with us.
I think the question might be asking about the foster youth empowerment groups that you have. We reach out to them individually before they come to the group meeting, and we let them know about the group. Often they've heard about it from other youth who are in the same group home or in others. So sometimes what we find, we're sitting down individually with them to let them know and also do some screening prior to meeting in the group that they already know about it. And I have to say, many youth come reluctantly, but then they see it and they feel the power of connecting with other kids, and they look forward to it each week. Great. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, just through relationships, predominantly it's through positive relationships. And then the youth, of course, it's voluntary. If you don't want to participate or would prefer not to, which does happen occasionally, it's really not a mandated part of their education. It's completely voluntary whether or not they participate.
Great. We have another question about, do all LEAs, that's local education agencies, have people who can be appointed as education decision makers for kids who are in congregate care with disabilities? The answer is no. Unfortunately, school districts do have an obligation to appoint surrogate parents for youth who need them within 30 days. And having a pool available to meet that need is certainly going to help them to comply with that legal obligation and to make sure that they have someone who's trained and will be able to be a good surrogate and advocate for that youth. But unfortunately, most LEAs don't have that at this point. I will also add that not every child who's in congregate care is going to need a surrogate parent or appointed by the school district or the court or an educational decision maker or representative appointed in states that allow that. They are probably more likely to need one because they, are not in a place where they have a foster parent or, but their biological parent may still be involved, or there might be another person who is making education decisions for them who's authorized to do so. Again, we'll underscore that this caseworker is not permitted to make special education decisions for them. Another question was how to decide if a student should attend the on-ground school or a local district school. Now, this is going to depend somewhat, but if the child is eligible for special education, typically the IEP team should decide the child's educational placement. This might be put off by the fact that there's a court order of where the child should go to school, then that is going to determine where the child goes to school. Also, if the child has been removed to an alternative education placement pursuant to the IDEA for a maximum of 45 days, then that can also determine where the child goes to school, or if there's another reason that the child meets the definition in that state for an alternative education program. But otherwise, the IT team should be deciding if the child is eligible for special ed. If the child is not eligible for special ed, again, it's going to vary by jurisdiction, but at a minimum should involve the youth and the youth's authorized education decision maker in determining where the youth is going to go to school, and all of that with an eye to getting the youth in the least restrictive option that's going to best meet their needs for the reasons I discussed at the beginning. Usually that's going to be either the school where they were previously attending and giving them school stability, or the local community school. One final question, I know we're over the line. Is the congregate care placement responsible for notifying the LEA that a student is at their facility? Not necessarily, but this certainly can help. In Pennsylvania, we have state guidance that encourages the facility to notify the LEA. School districts also have a responsibility under the IDEA for child find to know who are the youth in their district who have disabilities and are eligible for special education and to serve those youth. And I'll also note that Fostering Connections really encourages collaboration between the Child Welfare Agency and the district, and part of that is making sure that the district knows who it should be serving. So we are really short on time, so I'm just going to wrap up the questions. I have here the contact information for all our speakers today. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize, but please feel free to reach out directly to one of our speakers. And I will also just say that we have one other webinar coming up hosted by the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education. It will be right after the holidays, a free webinar on school climate and discipline for youth in foster care. And you can use the link here to register. We encourage you to join that. It should be a good discussion. So I just want to thank Liann and James for sharing their expertise with us today, and to all of you for joining us. And I wish you all a very happy holiday season. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.